I'm going to start with the most obvious thing, how to set a color channel in a particle system. Magma can be used to set any channel to any supported value, but the color channel is the most obvious thing to set because you get immediate feedback in the viewports. So you might find yourself using that just to visualize your data and figure out what is there in the particle system. Even though we have tools to visualize the data in numerical form, it's very convenient to actually see a velocity as a color, or velocity magnitude as a color, or position as a color, and so on. And we even provide the special viewport only color channel, so you don't destroy the colors that you want to render, and you can still visualize data in the viewports. So let's take a look. First, we'll output position into a color channel and take a look what it looks like and how to deal with the data. I'm going to open a scene that we'll be using a lot today. This is basically a particle flow that was saved to disk, to a PRT sequence, and I'm loading it right now with the PRT loader, where a bunch of particles, about 20,000 particles, I think, were emitted, they collide with the sphere and bounce down, and then they die after a while. I have saved all the necessary channels of this particle system. In fact, I can open the particle data viewer and show you what channels are there. We have the position, DAD, the lifespan, and DH, which are saved as ticks. We have the velocity saved, and the color is actually not saved. You see the sign here actually tells me that it's taken from the object color in this case. And the density is also defaulting to 1, but it's not something that was saved in the file. It just produced on the fly by the PRT loader. So now we are going to use the icons. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about customizing. In fact, actually a month ago, we were talking about customizing the user interface. And one of the icons, the one that says KCM, adds the actual Crypto channels modifier, which is not called Magma modifier in the version 2 of Crypto. And I'm going to open the Magma editor, and in this case I have the ability to press Ctrl-Alt to add a new output, and it defaults to color because that's the channel that I have been using the most recently. Looking at the usage frequency, color is on top. That's what I usually output to. With this channel selected, I press Shift-P and to get a position, and if I enable the auto update or press the update button, the data gets updated, and in this case what I'm getting is the XYZ of the particles output as RGB in the viewport. Now obviously our particles have some negative values in some cases. For example, when they pass through the ground plane, the z-axis becomes -z, so we don't see a color there. I could theoretically add an absolute value here, and right now we start seeing pretty much white everywhere. You have to keep in mind that the colors in the viewport can express only a range from 0 to 1, or in max script expression 0 to 255. But inside of Crypto Magma, we work in the range from 0 to 1. And right now, 1 is somewhere around here, very close to the origin, and everything else has values of 10, 20, 30, 50, and so on. So what we can also do is we can scale those values. I'm going to add a multiply in between and scale down. I can do 0.01, and now the colors are scaled, so an X of 100 will produce a value of 1, and everything in between is a gradient between 0 and 1. The alternative, and much easier to express actually, would be to switch this operator to divide and divide by 100, and it will produce the same result. And at the bottom, we actually start producing more blue because we use the absolute value, and the absolute value removed the sign pretty much. So we have positive there and positive also in the negative area. Currently, we are outputting the data in object space. That means that if I grab my PRT loader and start moving it around, the colors are not changing. They are in object space, so the transformations of my object play no role. If I select this position operator, the input, and press the button to world, it's going to convert the data to world space, but since it's currently aligned to the world, there is no change. But see what will happen if I start moving it around. I'm actually moving the particles in world space, and of course their positions converted to world space are changing, and the colors are also changing respectively. When I move along the X, I get more red, and when I move along the Y, I get more green. And if I move down or up along the Z-axis, I'm getting more blue. So let's continue and take a look what else we have here. Currently, we're setting the color channel directly from the position, but we could theoretically set it indirectly, not only in object and word space, but actually feed the position into some function that converts that into a completely different value. For example, I can feed in the position into a noise function or a texture map, and then calculate a new value on output. So there are lots of ways to actually set the color channel based on the position, but from right now we'll keep it in the basics, just position out to color. And if we want to output the color into the viewports, but not in the renderer, we can use a slightly different approach. There are two ways to actually do that. I'm going to divide by a different number here, so we get a little bit brighter particles, and I'll open the Kryktor renderer and actually render a frame here. If I render a frame with a little bit of motion blur, I have 8 passes, I get some particles, and they actually have the color that I'm visualizing with the position. But let's assume that I just wanted to see the positions, but not really render them. One thing we can do is, as with any modifier in Max, we can go and say it's off in renderer. So if I do this, particles will render in the object color. But instead of doing this, we actually have a special channel. And this special channel is called PAT viewport color. If I switch to this, I'm still getting the viewport color. And if I render, I'm still getting the object color of the PAT load. So whenever you want to visualize data in the viewports but not render it, you can output to the PAT viewport color, and that overrides the colors of the Kryktor PAT object. This applies to PAT loaders. So pretty much, let me open the Kryktor list here, and you're going to see that we have PAT volume here, film effects, PAT maker, PAT source, and PAT loader. All of them accept Magma modifiers and can be controlled that way. Color by age and lifespan is something that people tend to do a lot and ask about it a lot on the forums. Basically, when we save the age and lifespan out of particle flow, we get, as you saw when I opened the particle data viewer, 2 channels that actually contain integer ticks. Since the life of particles in particle flow is expressed in the internal time units of Max, which is 4,800 ticks per second. And that means that you have to do a little bit of calculations in order to allow Magma to express a gradient between 0 and 1 that we actually need to blend some colors. So I'm going to go here to frame 30 and select this object again and add another KCM. So here is a Magma. I'm outputting again to color. I press Shift A, which creates me an H input channel. I hit the divide button. I'm going to sort this automatically here. And then I press Shift L, which is the lifespan. You don't have to remember this. And as we spoke about 2 weeks ago, you can press I, C, and then see the list of all the channels. And some of them also have keyboard shortcuts, so it's relatively easy to create any channel that exists. But once you remember that Shift A is H and Shift L is lifespan, it's very fast to create something. But at this point, you would expect the division of the one by the other, since this is going from 0 to a value of equal to the lifespan before the particle dies, and the lifespan is always that value. The one divided by the other will normalize the value between 0 and 1. But it turns out that in Magma, you can't divide by an integer because the result wouldn't be what you would expect. You would, in this case, get 0 all the time, and we feel that that's not a good idea. We'd rather have you convert the value explicitly. So we have added, to speed this up, we have a button that says convert to float, and do the same with both the age and lifespan. And at this point, it still wouldn't work because I'm outputting a floating point number between 0 and 1 as a color, and that doesn't work. So if I do a convert to vector, now I have that value fed into the red channel, and now I'm getting a gradient that goes between black and red as the particles die. I can connect the two and actually get it to be black and white. I mean, from black to gray to white before they die. But a much better approach in this case would be to actually introduce a function blend. And because it connects to the first slot, but I want it in the third, I press Control W to swap the first and second, and then Shift Control W to swap the second and the third. And now I'm controlling two inputs, which I haven't connected yet, with that floating point number. And when it's 0, the first input will be taken. When it's 1, will be the second. And when it's 0.5, it will be 50-50 mix of the two, and correspondingly a mix. So I'm going to create a red input by pressing Shift 1 and a yellow input, Shift 6. And at this point, if I go and play back, I'm getting red particles in the beginning, and then they go and fall off until they die, become yellow. Now I have two colors, but if I want to have more colors, I could theoretically go here, back to around here, and say, instead of this, I'm going to introduce, I have a black op that actually ships with Cricketer Magma, which is a compound operator. You can look inside what it does, but basically it gets three colors and it blends between them using two blends, depending on whether the value is below 0.5 or above. So in this case, I can go and introduce this into the flow. And now I'm going to add red, a blue, and a yellow color as inputs. And if I play back my animation, I'm getting red, then blue, and then at some point they turn into yellow, and then they die. Of course, I could also introduce an exponent control here. So I can bend the curve actually gets the influence of my floating point normalized value of the division between age and lifespan to be shifted more towards the first color or the last color. But it's much more obvious if I remove this and switch this arithmetic operator to actually to be function curve. And with the function curve, I can open the curve editor and just tweak the contribution of the value. So I can say I will have another point in the middle here, and I can grab this point, make it a Bezier smooth one, go back to moving the point and say, okay, here in the middle will be yellow, and then in the back we'll go back to red. So it starts red, goes to blue, goes to yellow when they are middle-aged particles, and then they go back to blue and back to red and so on. So I have a lot of control how to tweak your input values in order to mix the colors. But if three colors are still not enough for you, there is a much better approach to this. We are going to output, instead of actually writing directly to the color channel, we'll output to the texture code channel, and we'll assign, I'm going to convert this to vector again, CV for convert to vector, and I'm setting only the U coordinate because that's all I need. I want to use a gradient ramp in a standard material, which I'll assign to this object. I'll add a new gradient ramp, and gradient ramp uses the explicit map channel by default. If I update, you're going to see the black color from the side, and then it will go over the curve. Actually, I'll remove the curve, so it goes from black to white linearly. And now you can actually go and change those colors. You can say, okay, this will be shade of green, this could start at red, and this could end at blue, and I can introduce a some orange color, I mean yellow here. So we'll go through orange, and then we'll go here through let's say cyan. So it's pretty much the whole spectrum represented now on the particles. It starts at red, goes through all those colors until they die and turn blue. In this case, you really have full control over the life, which is, here's the particle birth and here's the particle death, and you can go through any number of colors in between based on the age and lifespan. You can do pretty much the same with the velocity. Instead of dividing the age by the lifespan, all we need to do is actually take, let me delete these notes here, take a input vector, which is shift V, and then take its magnitude, Vm, vector magnitude. I mean, in this case, is the velocity magnitude. And since our velocity is has a relatively large magnitude, some of these particles are moving up to 220 units per second. I would have to divide this value by the maximum velocity that I want. I'm going to enter a number about 220, which basically now gives us slow particles. I'll shift this a little bit up so I can see them. Slow particles are actually getting the red color. Now they're getting faster and faster, and then they slow down a little bit when they collide, and then they speed up a lot more and become red. And if I want to change the order of these guys, I can either invert this, or I can just come here and change the tiling to -1. And in this case, I will start at blue and go around, and then we'll end, fast particles will actually be red. And you'll probably notice here that just before they die, some particles actually turn blue. And the reason is that the tiling is on, and if the tiling is on, obviously, it can wrap around, and it's still not optimal. So it's a good idea when you are outputting UV coordinates to also introduce a clamp that cuts a little bit from the left and right of the range. So I'm going to say FC, which is function clamp, and I'm going to enter 0.1 here and 0.99 here, just to make sure that none of the colors wraps around and the particle before it dies turns into red. Now it's actually clean, and then ensures that the range is same.